Welcome to Media Melanie Talks TV. I'm Melanie, and today I'm back to talk about The Hunting Party on NBC, streaming to Peacock the next day. We finally got our second episode titled Clayton Jessup. My initial reaction to this is, okay, we have an underground silo-style prison. We learn 75% of the inmates probably didn't make it. Flash forward to Clayton Jessup, the case of the week criminal who the team is tracking. The guy does not have a scratch on him. How are these criminals getting out of this prison and escaping without any injuries when it killed so many people? Even Oliver Odell, our warden, was in the hospital with injuries, and he seemingly knew about the blast. So I'm all about suspending disbelief for dramatic purposes, but I would not mind seeing some of these criminals showing any evidence of having lived through this massive explosion. My other big question here is, what exactly is Oliver Odell's involvement in all of this? They are leading us to believe that perhaps he could be the big baddie in all of this, but I also think it's way too early in the series to be framing him as the big bad. I've got to believe that there are other entities or conspiracies at play here, and maybe he is tangentially involved, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say Oliver Odell is maybe not quite as bad as they're making him out to be, but they do need to give him a bad side because there is going to be this back and forth, this push and pull between him and Bex given their history. So, before we dive more into the episode, which I will cover in 3 parts, first I'll go over the case of the week, then I will go over some of the Bex backstories, and end with what we learned about the prison and my biggest questions and theories moving into episode 3. Please go ahead and like this video and hit the subscribe button. I do cover a lot of other dark TV shows. Stick with me for even more TV talk. Let's move into the case of the week. And again, this is a procedural, so we are getting a criminal investigated and caught or killed in each episode. But we are getting pieces of this ongoing feel of serialization with a bigger picture conspiracy at play. Clayton Jessup is that case of the week, and boy, this one is creepy. At the beginning of the episode, we have Jennifer Morales, who is an Army intelligence officer, briefing Bex and letting her know that they've been doing some surveillance and they found a carjacking in Nebraska that seems like it could be tied into one of the criminals, and indeed it is. Shane, Bex, and Hassani all board the plane and get on their way to start pursuing this latest inmate. And again, this is a pretty creepy one. We open up with some flashbacks to a 16-year-old Clayton Jessup sitting around a table celebrating his 16th birthday. He's got a cake, he's got a candle in it. I could tell there was something amiss here. In my mind, I was picturing exactly what was revealed, a table full of corpses. Clayton ended up killing his family. He stayed in the house with them for 3 days, enacting different family scenes that he thought depicted this picture-perfect family. And then he went on a killing spree. His MO is carbon monoxide poisoning, and we do see him leveraging that once again here in the present day. We also got a little peek into the prison before the blast. Right before the blast, we saw Clayton Jessup watching these super creepy PSAs. And they're monitoring his reactions to them. The way that you can see his facial expressions, his reactions to watching these PSAs, that is some very fascinating stuff, and it also horrifies me to think what I look like when I'm watching TV, the emotions that I go through depending on the show. I am glad nobody is, hopefully, monitoring my reactions, and why would they be? I'm no criminal. This idea of remote visual cognitive monitoring is very interesting to me, and I'll get a little bit more into that when we dive into things we've learned about the prison, because this does seem like it ties into the experiments or whatever sort of non-traditional therapies that they are using on these inmates. Jessup has attachment reactive disorder, so when he escapes, he basically jumps right back into where he was before. He goes and kidnaps the actors who were in these PSAs that we learn were produced just for him by Dr. Lansing / Dr. Pretzel. because during one of their therapy sessions, Jessup actually grabbed him and kind of accidentally ended up paralyzing him because the guard flipped out when he saw Jessup embracing Dr. Lansing. And unfortunately, that ended with Dr. Lansing ending up in a wheelchair and not working at the pit anymore. Interestingly, though, Dr. Lansing actually wanted to return there and they would not let him. Shane alludes to the fact that things worked differently back then, and Lansing says something about the powers that be didn't want him back, which sparked a little bit of curiosity in me. Why would they not want him back? I mean, obviously it's a huge liability after one of their inmates literally paralyzes a doctor, but it makes me think that it seems like there could have been even more disturbing therapies or methods at play to help or experiment on these prisoners. So I would not be surprised if our Dr. Lansing / Dr. Pretzel knows more than he's letting on. He was not very forthcoming with information. In fact, he was not very forthcoming with even letting the team know that Jessup was in the house because for some strange reason, he didn't think Jessup would hurt him. I think that's wild. I guess I understand because the paralyzing accident was not something that was done on purpose initially. All I'm saying is if a criminal gets out of jail and they were locked up in a top secret prison, that is not somebody I want in my house, and I would be giving all of the secret signals to get that man out of my basement, along with all of the hostages there, which he must be aware of. This is madness. And before Jessup actually got there with all of the kidnapped victims, Irene was the first one. She's the perfect mom who was in this PSA. When they were driving in the car, the disturbing nature of those close-ups where Clayton felt like he was just right in your face, talk about crazy eyes. This actor just nailed this role by being a completely unhinged psychopathic killer. Jessup goes right back to his roots and employs the MO of carbon monoxide poisoning once again. Unfortunately, Shane falls victim to it in the basement along with all of the other PSA participants. Luckily, Bex is able to discern that, yes, Jessup is in the basement. She goes down there. Not very bright though, Bex, because you end up getting the door slammed on you. Luckily, you did not pass out quickly. She was able to shoot that bulkhead open and get out, get the air to breathe, eventually rescue Shane and everybody else, although it does appear that Jessup ends up dead in the end when Bex was checking his pulse. If Hassani hadn't showed up at that moment, I'm not sure Bex was going to be able to talk Jessup down. The timing of it all, am I right? There was another timing incident in this episode too. When the team was chasing Michael, he escaped through the woods and just happened to stumble upon the car of Jessup, who was then able to take him. It seemed a little bit too perfect timing to me. I suppose Jessup could have been camped out there waiting to take Michael. So it is possible that it makes sense, but I'm not 100%. What I enjoyed about this case was that they ended up having some post-mortem tacos. Nothing like celebrating with tacos. Just for fun, drop your favorite type of taco down in the comments. I live in San Diego, am an avid fan of Taco Tuesdays, and always appreciate watching people eat tacos, no matter where they are. Going to this Mexican restaurant opened up a conversation between Hassani and Bex. Bex says something like, you guys can have your secrets, but there has to be some level of back and forth or trust here, which does allow Hassani to open up to Bex. And he does get into a couple of the details regarding the prison. We will get into those shortly. Before we do, let's dive into some of the Bex backstories. I think this will be an ongoing segment in my weekly videos because they are breadcrumbing us with little tidbits about Beck's history to give us more context into her character, the type of agent she is, and really why she's still having this major PTSD over Eli Johnson. Eli Johnson is played by Mark Moses, who I recognized as Duck from Mad Men. He was also in Desperate Housewives, which I did not watch. But it seems like he's going to have a pretty big part in this story moving forward. Otherwise, why would Odell have brought him in unless it was to show Bex that Oliver knows the truth and that he could potentially use that against her at any time? Conversely, wouldn't Oliver get in trouble as well because he was initially the one that buried that truth so that Bex could become an agent? He could be just trying to butter Bex up, try to get her on his side, and make her a malleable asset that he can use in this investigation, because if he is involved, it makes sense he wants Bex there. He is going to use their past relationship to get what he wants. As Shane mentions during a conversation with Bex, yes, Eli Johnson is the one that Bex Nancy Drewed when she was younger. It was her friend Naomi's dad, and she told everybody that she had just figured out something was wrong, went to inspect the garage, and figured out what he was up to. What she left out was the fact that Naomi was with her and Bex ran away. And by the time she was able to wake up her dad, who was in law enforcement, and get back there with the police, Naomi was dead. That is something that Bex has been carrying around with her forever, and probably shaped why she went into law enforcement in the first place. And yes, she did think that Eli Johnson was potentially in the pit. This episode opens up with her walking into the hangar to try and identify inmates. She's trying to go and uncover these bodies and determine if Eli was in fact there. Odell confirms that he was not, but he did bring him to Bex so that they could have this conversation. And again, he could show Bex that he wasn't lying, the guy was never at the pit, and perhaps give her an opportunity to get some kind of closure. Although I think this is the furthest thing from closure, and like I said, expect Eli Johnson to be a big part of this story moving forward. And really, like Oliver said, Bex was just a kid when all of this happened, and really, she can't hold herself responsible for it, but clearly it is a demon that is haunting her and may come back into play. All right, I made a list of all the things that we learned about the prison in this episode. The first one, there are no answers in the pit. Well, that's good fodder for a TV show, because all we want are answers, and we will do our very best to get to them and take what they give us to try to put the clues together. Initially, the gas leaks and the bad pipes were the story regarding the explosion, but then we saw a text to Hassani saying that they actually got the results back on the explosives, which we have not been privy to yet. The name of the task force is the Inmate Recovery Task Force. As Beck said, that moved fast, and as Jennifer said, well, the military moves fast. I wonder if they knew that this was going to happen and they already had the table set for this task force to exist, and they were just able to seamlessly get the people they needed and start investigating. Allegedly, the president doesn't know about the pit, or at least needs plausible deniability, because they are covering this up. I know why they're covering it up. They obviously don't want the public to know that there's a secret underground prison with 25% of its inmates on the loose. I'm guessing in future seasons, if the show does get them, the public will eventually find out. One of these criminals is going to do something that draws some major attention to themselves, and that will open up a whole nother can of prison worms when we get there. We learned that there were 5 inmates who were recovered alive, but there are still dozens of bodies that need identifying. A dead guard near the explosion site did test positive for C4, and if one guard is potentially involved in this, I'm just going to say it now. Could Shane be a part of this? Could this task force be a complete front, with Shane and Oliver being plants here to manipulate and control the situation and make sure whatever they're covering up doesn't actually get out there? Perhaps they will give Bex the illusion that they are filling her in on what's going on, but they could be completely throwing her off base and just using her for her profiling skills to capture these inmates. Again, though, it's no coincidence Oliver brought in Bex. They have a history. He knows she's a good agent. I just can't tell yet if he brought her in to control her and use their history as a tool to lead her in the right directions for what he does want uncovered or not uncovered. But all I'm saying, if there's one guard involved, there could be more. Who's paying the guard to do this? I don't think he's doing it on his own volition. If it is an outside force and it's not, say, Oliver wanting to blow up his own prison for some reason regarding this data breach, who's paying him? I mentioned in the first video, perhaps it is a big criminal cabal, and they want to see what chaos can ensue from releasing all of these prisoners out there. Or one of my other theories was that they have been experimenting, trying to cure these criminals of their afflictions, and this is just a big test to see, hey, let's see what happens if we put them all back out there. Maybe they're cured. Well, they're definitely not cured. Only 2 episodes in, I feel pretty confident saying that. Along with the guard, we learned that 10 minutes before this explosion, there was some data that was breached from none other than Oliver Odell's office. 1,000 terabytes of data, which is a lot of data. 1 terabyte is a ton of data. 1,000 terabytes? What kind of data are we talking here? Is it simply just inmate information? Or something else I mentioned before, are there multiple of these prisons and those records are somehow tied into the other sites and they need to be kept hidden or kept out of the wrong hands? Not sure whose hands those are yet, but we all know there's going to be some big bad reveal at some time. Who do you think it is? I know it's a little bit early, but it is never too soon to theorize. Seriously though, how did Oliver survive this? Even if he knew the blast was coming, can you effectively protect yourself from it? I mean, yes, he obviously did somehow, and other people made it out as well. He was at least hospitalized, so I buy that he was injured. Whereas, again, the first thing I said here today is, why are these prisoners not more injured from this wildly huge explosion? All right, so this remote visual cognitive monitoring, what is the deal with that? I'm just gonna go ahead and read some information from a scholarly article that I found. This seems like a pretty complex cognitive type of thing, which plays into the fact that they are doing experimentation to potentially cure these criminals. All right, here we go. Many individuals living with severe mental illness, such as schizophrenia, present cognitive deficits, and reasoning biases negatively impacting clinical and functional trajectories. Remote cognitive assessment presents many opportunities for advancing research and treatment, but is yet to be widely used in psychiatric populations, except maybe in the pit. This experiment conducted a scoping review of remote cognitive assessment in severe mental illness to provide an overview of available measures and guide best practices. 34 studies were reviewed, and remote measures, psychometrics, facilitators, barriers, and future directions were synthesized using a logic model. What I take from that is they are playing these videos and measuring all of the data and analytics that goes along with his reactions. They are obviously recording his facial reactions, how he is consuming this, and maybe how it is affecting his brain waves, although I didn't see anything like hooked up to brain wave wires here, so I'm not really sure what the data will show or how measuring these reactions will actually help. Maybe they're formulating some sort of chip. I'm also covering Severance on Apple TV Plus, which has a lot to do with severing part of the brain. Maybe they're going down a similar road here, trying to develop something to prevent certain reactions from happening. And this is part of the data gathering phase where they are doing all of their measurements. And then once they have a better picture of what's going on, somehow use this to create a cure, a chip, whatever it may be. This episode was pretty decent. I mean, it's not knocking my socks off here, but I do think we have potential. I'm a big fan of criminal procedurals in general. I loved The Blacklist, and I did mention before, this could potentially live up to that. I just am not sure it will get there. I will come back next week and do another reaction and review and kind of take everybody's temperature on where we are with the Hunting Party 3 episodes in. Like I said, it's not wowing me, but it's not completely turning me off either. I will admit, I did pick up my phone and scroll a couple of times during this episode. I mean, it wasn't action-packed, it wasn't earth-shattering, but it's always interesting diving into the minds of criminals and the people who put their lives at risk to go out there and catch them. What's next for our inmate task force? Who's going to be the criminal next week? What do you think is going on? It is pretty early, so formulating a bigger picture is difficult, but I'm just going to say I don't think this is a government conspiracy. I wouldn't be surprised if this was some sort of third-party, big corporation, privatized prison where these things are happening with potentially a mad scientist at the helm who is conducting these experiments. To what end, I'm not sure. I don't know if they are good and they are really trying to cure them. Maybe they are trying to isolate some sort of criminal gene that they can use to develop an army of criminals. It's all to be determined, and we've got 8 episodes left to figure it out. So, Be sure to like this video, drop a comment, let me know what you think is going on so far in the hunting party, and are you enjoying it? Will you come back for another episode? Be sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of my coverage for the hunting party and, as I mentioned, other dark TV shows. I'm covering Severance on Apple TV+, finishing up Dexter Original Sin on Paramount Plus with Showtime, Paradise on Hulu, School Spirits on Paramount Plus, and The White Lotus is coming up soon, so don't miss my coverage there. I really appreciate you tuning in. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Media Melanie, clicking off.